But more and more they were moved to struggle for their own rights. The Declaration of Independence spoke only of the rights of men, not women. In 1848, a group of women, seeking to win the rights not granted to them in the Declaration or the Constitution, gathered in Seneca Falls, New York, to draw up their own Women's Declaration of Rights.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has made her, if married in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right and property, even to the wages she earns. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. In view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States.
Women had long been denied the right to vote, even after helping to win voting rights for blacks with the passage of the 15th Amendment. In November 1872, Susan B. Anthony was one of 14 women who defied the law to cast a ballot in the presidential election. Anthony was arrested for, quote, knowingly voting without having a lawful right to vote, unquote, and was found guilty.
Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced?
Yes, Your Honor. I have many things to say. Your denial of my citizens' right to vote is the denial of my right of consent as one of the governed, the denial of my right of representation as one of the taxed, the denial of my right to a trial by a jury of my peers as an offender against law. Therefore, the denial of my sacred right to life, liberty, property...
The court cannot allow the prisoner to go on.
But Your Honor will not deny me this one and only poor privilege of protest against this high-handed outrage upon my citizens' rights.
The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the costs of the prosecution.
May it please Your Honor, I will never pay $1 of your unjust penalty. All the stock in trade I possess is a debt of $10,000 incurred by publishing my paper, The Revolution, the sole object of which was to educate all women to do precisely as I have done. Rebel against your man-made, unjust, unconstitutional forms of law, which tax, fine, imprison, and hang women while denying them the right of representation in the government. And I will work on with might and main to pay every dollar of that honest debt, but not a penny shall go to this unjust claim. And I shall earnestly and persistently continue to urge all women to the practical recognition of the old revolutionary maxim, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God.
Women were not just concerned with winning the right to vote. They were among the earliest organizers in the workplace. The women who worked in the textile mills of New England in the 1830s, some as young as 10 years old, working brutally long hours for a pittance in wages, began to organize and conducted one of the first labor strikes in American history. One of the mill girls, Harriet Hanson Robinson, years later recalled her experience in a strike in Lowell, Massachusetts.
At the time the Lowell cotton mills were started, the factory girl was the lowest among women. In the eyes of her overseer, she was but a brute slave, there to be beaten, pinched, pushed about. When it was announced that the wages were to be cut down, great indignation was felt, and it was decided to strike. This was done. The mills were shut down. The girls went in procession from their several corporations to the Grove on Capitol Hill. One of the girls stood on a pump and gave vent to the feelings of her companions, declaring that it was their duty to resist all attempts at cutting down the wages. This was the first time a woman had spoken in public in Lowell. The event caused surprise and consternation among her audience. My own recollection of this first strike is very vivid. I worked in a lower room where I heard the proposed strike fully, if not vehemently, discussed. I had been an ardent listener to what was said against this attempt at oppression on the part of the corporation, and naturally, I took sides with the strikers. When the day came on which the girls were to turn out, those in the upper room started first, and so many of them left that our mill was at once shut down. Then, when the girls in my room stood, irresolute, uncertain what to do, asking each other, would you? Or shall we turn out? And not one of them having the courage to lead off. I, who began to think they would not go out after all their talk, became impatient. I started on ahead, saying with childish bravado, I don't care what you do. I am going to turn out, whether anyone else does or does not. And I marched out, and I was followed by the others. As I looked back on that long line that followed me, I was more proud than I have ever been at any success that I might have achieved.
In more recent times, women took up the struggle for the right to choose, a right eventually recognized by the Supreme Court. Here, Susan Brown Miller, a journalist and feminist, speaks about the early days of the pro-choice movement.
1969 was a precisely defined moment, the year when women of childbearing age transformed a quiet back burner issue promoted by a handful of stray radicals and moderate reformers into a popular struggle for reproductive freedom. 1 million women braved the unknown every year, relying on a grapevine of whispers and misinformation to terminate their pregnancies by illegal means. The less fortunate risked septic infection and a punctured uterus from back alley amateurs willing to poke their insides with a catheter, a knitting needle, or the unfurled end of a wire hanger. Still others damaged their health with lye or Lysol, the last-ditch home treatments. Women of my generation still need to bear witness. We still carry the traumas.
Sojourner Truth, a former slave, talked about the double burden of being both black and a woman, and about the power of women to change the world.
That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it. And I could bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? That man in the back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from. He came from God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well, these women here together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And they asking to do it. The men better let them.